It is time to talk about a demon, determinism, and free will. Imagine that everything in the universe is composed of tiny particles called atoms, like steel balls in a ping-pong machine, and that everything that occurs in the universe is the result of those atoms colliding and bouncing off each other. This was the scientific worldview around the beginning of the 19th century. Now also imagine an entity, let's call it a demon, that has unlimited cognitive capabilities. This demon was part of a thought experiment of one Pierre-Simon Laplace. Laplace's demon also had knowledge of the precise positions and momentums of all of the atoms in the universe. With the incredible mental powers it had, it could use the laws of classical mechanics to calculate all the previous positions and momentums of the atoms, or just as well, all their future positions and momentums. Because everything in the universe was composed of atoms, and besides empty space, that was all there was, the demon could know everything about the past and the future. Laplace's demon shows that everything in the universe is determined to occur exactly the way it does, and nothing can change anything. And since we are part of the universe, that applies to us as well. Whatever will happen to us, and even whatever we end up doing ourselves, will have been determined by events in the very distant past. That is, of course, if the assumptions of the thought experiment are correct. Laplace's demon is an argument for causal determinism, the view that everything in the universe follows causal laws, and therefore we are not free to make our choices. The demon is only used to illustrate the point. It does not matter whether or not anyone can actually have the kind of knowledge required to make the predictions. The point is that the future events will still be caused by previous events. This view has been opposed by Christians and others who see free will as an important attribute that at least humans have in their view. It is important particularly for the Christian belief that human souls will be judged and either condemned to hell for eternity or else saved to heaven. The judgment should be based on the moral conduct of the person during their lives. Although strangely, Jesus is thought to intervene and save anyone who repents, sort of removing the whole point of divine judgment. But anyway, even if everyone gets to go to heaven, what matters is what they deserve. Hell. But how could they deserve either hell or heaven if they have never actually chosen anything? If even their apparent decisions were actually determined well before they were even born. Many people want to believe that instead of determinism, the actions of at least us humans, and possibly other events as well, are undetermined instead. This view is called indeterminism. Not all Christians need to have a huge problem with determinism. Calvinists, for example, believe in predestination. God has decided already when he created the universe who will be saved and who will not, who will be destined to heaven and who to hell. No human action can change what God has preordained. The Calvinist view is similar to fatalism, the belief in fate. The fatalist believes that a person's fate cannot be escaped, and no matter what they do, even if they have been somehow revealed what their fate will be, they cannot avoid it. For example, the ancient Greek tragedy Oedipus is based on fatalism. The same motif is also used in movies because Apparently, people like the idea of fatalism, at least in fiction. The difference between fatalism and the idea of predestination is that the latter is only about the destination of the soul, while the former is usually understood to be about the mundane, not necessarily even about the way a person dies, but about the sorts of things that happen to them during their lifetime. People can think they were fated to meet the love of their life, have 3 children, and crushing death hanging over their heads as they realize the world is really going to burn. Well, you get the point. The exact events in their lives could have gone differently, but the fated events would nevertheless happen. In some science fiction movies, this idea is hammered home by allowing travel in time. But no matter how many times it is used, the fated result is always the same, even if via different routes. One movie using this idea is the Butterfly Effect of 2004. Premonition from 2007 is simpler but still based on fatalism. But fatalism is definitely not determinism. There is no fatalism in causal determinism. Instead, things happen because of causal laws, with no particular purpose or goal. The version of it used in the demon argument can be called predeterminism, because it is the idea that the whole past and future are set, and could not be any other way. Science has advanced since the beginning of the 19th century quite a bit. It now seems that the fundamental structure of the universe, laws of nature, is actually not quite that deterministic. Quantum indeterminism means that events studied in quantum physics are not like those of classical mechanics, where the future position of a billiard ball after a collision with the wall of the pool table can be determined, calculated, before the collision even occurs. In quantum events, that sort of exactness is not possible, but instead probabilities can be calculated. This has been latched onto by many as proof that determinism isn't true. But that is not quite so. Classical determinism seems false, yes, and with it predeterminism seems unlikely as well. But quantum indeterminism is still working according to strict laws of physics, and so the deterministic worldview of science still holds. Even chaos theory, while it makes a strong case for our lack of ability to predict things, is still deterministic. The difference to the classical view is that the present-day view does not allow us to predict the future exactly, even in principle. Laplace's demon could only provide predictions about possible futures, but not know which will be the actual. Even things like weather cannot be predicted for periods longer than a few days. That has nothing to do with quantum mechanics. It is what chaos theorists have shown to occur even with classical, medium-sized objects. It is just not possible to have enough data with good enough accuracy. The systems being analyzed are too complicated, and with inaccurate starting data, this results in unforeseeable events very quickly in the future. Computer models for weather can result in very different outcomes over any period longer than a few days, when there are just minute differences in the variables. But our ability or inability to predict the weather or anything else has little to do with the metaphysical problem posed by determinism. Everything still seems to follow causal laws. That hasn't changed. It means that reality might be unpredictable, but it is still caused physically. This is not the free will some people want. The idea of free will is that it is free from causality, that our actions are somehow not affected by the physical reality we exist in. The ancient philosopher Epicurus was an atomist who believed that everything was made of indivisible atoms in otherwise empty space. But he thought that sometimes those atoms move a bit randomly, and that is how we can have free will. But is that really plausible? Even if our actions were somehow partially, or even completely, random, that is surely not free will, for wherein that is the will? It seems counterintuitive to speak of you having the will to do X if your intention to do X is just somehow randomly generated. Doesn't it seem to make much more sense that you want to do X because that is the kind of person you are? And is it not your past experiences that have molded you into the person you are now? Doesn't the existence of your will seem to require that you in fact are determined by all sorts of things, such as your genetics, the environment you grew up in, your upbringing, interaction with your friends, and all sorts of experiences that influence you throughout your life? Benjamin Libet was a neuroscientist who showed that there is a type of activation in the brain preceding a conscious decision. When a person becomes aware that they want to press a button, this activation has reached a certain level. Based on that, the scientists can predict when the person will experience the will to press the button. This seems to make sense to a determinist like myself, because how else could it really happen? I am not an entity separate from my brain. If my conscious awareness is something my brain creates, it makes sense that before the thought of pressing a button rises to my consciousness, it has been under construction, so to speak, in subconscious processes. I just admitted that I am a causal or metaphysical determinist. There have been proposals for determinism that I do not subscribe to. These are simplistic views known as genetic determinism, the belief that everything in your life is determined by your genes, and social or psychological determinism, the belief that your social environment and experiences completely determine your life. Both are extreme views that exaggerate one type of thing when both types are important. We are clearly influenced by genetics. Just look at how similar you are to your parents or siblings compared to other people, as well as social factors. You can imagine how different your life would be under very different circumstances. The middle ground may usually be a fallacy, but here the truth does seem to be somewhere between the extremes. One could try to argue that determinism isn't true, because if it were, we could not make random choices. Let's assume that we can be rational as we function properly, while causal laws are creating our minds. When choosing between two equally delicious-looking tofu dishes, a rational mind, functioning only as the causal laws dictate, could not decide which to choose. So we could end up starring between two plates. This line of thinking is based on the idea known as Buridan's ass, although it wasn't Jean Buridan's idea. One obvious solution to save us from starvation would be to choose randomly. But how could our minds create randomness if they are determined? Another solution could be that when pressed with such an insoluble dilemma, we can think outside the box, look for deciding factors outside of rational reasons. This can happen unconsciously. You think you are choosing randomly, but perhaps your decision is actually based on your preference to the right-hand side. So you choose the plate that is on your right. Or perhaps the kitchen is on your right and you choose the plate that is closest to the kitchen. Or some other such otherwise insignificant factor comes into play. I have now given some arguments for and against determinism, and even stated what I think on the matter. But you shouldn't think this is all there is to the matter. Certainly I wouldn't want you to think that I am an authority you have to agree with. Hopefully you will think about it, maybe look for more information on the subject, and possibly form a tentative opinion on your own. For example, you may think that perhaps there is a third way, combining determinism and free will. There is, and it is called compatibilism because it is based on the idea that free will is somehow compatible with determinism. For that to be the case, it is likely to require a redefinition of free will. When discussing or thinking about things like determinism, it may be useful to be aware of the concepts necessary and contingent. If something is necessary, it could not have been otherwise. But if it is only contingent, then it could have been different, at least in some way. The point is that there are possibilities, for example, different things you could decide to do right now. But some things are not possible. You are unable to levitate through the roof of your apartment, for example. You also cannot decide to suddenly be the president of your country. Thus, there is a list of possible choices that you are choosing your actions from, depending on your imagination and awareness of possible courses of action. Perhaps none of the options is necessarily the one you will choose, but it is impossible for you to choose some options, even if you are able to imagine them. I have been talking about causality here as if that were an obvious concept. To show how that is not the case, in the next video I will talk about how Aristotle understood causal explanation. See you then. If you wish to support my channel, please click thumbs up, subscribe and share my videos. Any comments on the videos would also be welcome.